I want some intro music from Ignacio. Where is Ignacio? First of all, I was playing poker till really late last night, so I'm a little rough around the edges. I got my slides to you at like midnight. I was at the table doing the slides. Okay, so I'll just start with a little bit about myself. I'm actually going to give you a somewhat cynical view of this entire space of what it means to be a growth hacker. So don't be offended. A little bit about me. I think Aaron just touched upon this. I graduated from EE, and in the midst of trying to find my way, I ended up working at an investment bank for a year trading derivatives. It was probably the most insipid, idiotic use of my time. And the biggest thing that I realized was that bankers are like smart enough to be greedy, but not smart enough to be useful. So I quit, and I applied to all these jobs online, and I got one at Winamp accidentally. And we actually built something really cool. But the thing that I learned at Winamp, and all of this ties together, so apologize for rambling, but we actually had one of the most important and early consumer platforms available, which was the set of abstractions that we had built to allow people to customize our product. You built skins, you built plugins, and what it actually did was start to refine my understanding of sort of how when you develop sort of things that appeal to specific sets of consumers, you start to get this operational leverage in your product. We were 7 people. And the things that we did as a 7-person group were pretty impressive back in the day. 100 million users, not as impressive as it is today as it was back then when the internet was a lot smaller, but it was still quite an interesting product and really defined a lot of the characteristics of how I actually approached things when I was at Facebook. Winamp was acquired by AOL, and at AOL, I bumbled along into a bunch of different jobs and ultimately was able to run AIM and ICQ, which was the instant messaging product. And the takeaway from that were 2 things. One, and I'll get to this a little bit later, most people at most companies are really shit. And that was manifested in large degree at AOL. So I learned all the things not to do, one, and that was probably 90% of my learnings, to be quite honest with you. And then 10% was reinforcing some things that I learned at Winamp, which is really about core product value and what it means to sort of create a real connection with someone. I think now we all kind of euphemistically call it the aha moment with the consumer. But also the power of how these communication networks, when they develop, create real entrenched usage and scale, and how these things can just dramatically accelerate adoption and engagement. And then lastly, I spent a bunch of time at Facebook. So the Facebook story is actually really interesting, and I'll tell it sort of interleave it as I go through the rest of the slides. I spend most of my time investing and playing poker, to be quite honest with you. Some of the big ones that I was a fairly large stakeholder in, Playdom, Yammer, which we sold for about $2 billion in combined value. I'm a fairly large investor in Box and Palantir and a bunch of very small companies now, some of which where I act as a co-founder, some of which that I don't. And a lot of people like to tout every return that they have on their blog. I don't blog or use the Twitter, but the track record here is pretty good. I'm a dad. I have 2 kids, another one on the way in January. I play a lot of poker. And I own the Warriors in the NBA. That's what that means, baller, for all you people who don't use the Urban Dictionary, just this with it. It's okay? All right, so let's talk about growth. Everyone asks me, because this is like the topic du jour, it's what everyone wants to know. It's like, what was the secret? It's like almost as if like, we're the NSA and we've like developed something and like nobody knows, or like, some secret backroom negotiation between us and governments. And it's like none of that shit. We did 3 really obvious brain dead things, and the reality was we lacked enough self-awareness and ego to frankly just continue to do these very simple things over and over and over again, repetitively, monotonously, to a point where every time we used to see things move in one direction or another, we would either keep doing them or stop doing them and not second-guess ourselves. And so I kind of tell people, look, we actually just looked at a lot of data, we measured a lot of stuff, we tested a lot of stuff, and we tried a lot of stuff. Now, that masks over a lot of more nuanced understanding, but at an extremely high level, that's really what we did. And what's shocking to me is when I see like a lot of products out there, it's unbelievable to me that people are trying to shroud products in this veneer of complexity that makes themselves seem like so good and so smart, and I'm this fucking hipster and I'm riding the Muni in San Francisco, and look at my oolong green tea that I bought organically, and look at these ripped tight skinny jeans that I bought. And it's like, you got to get over yourself. Like, measure some shit, try some shit, test some more shit, throw the stuff that doesn't work. It's not that complicated. And I see app after app after app, and I get inundated. And when I download it and I try it, I'm like, did you even spend 8 seconds using your own product? It's unbelievable the lack of dogfooding that happens. And so most people, when they think about growth, they think it's this convoluted thing where you're trying to generate these, extra normal behaviors in people. And that's not what it's about. What it's about is a very simple, elegant understanding of product value and consumer behavior. And when you shroud yourself in all the bullshit veneer, and this is the single biggest problem in the Valley today, you will miss the mark. And the problem is we're in this massive long tail where you've had these seminal, huge successes occur, and now you have all these people who have two choices, and they're extremely difficult choices. Choice number one is you do what you think is right, independent of what the external feedback loop tells you. And choice number two is you do what you read about and what you get, credit for and what people tell you is interesting. And that second class of things destroys products. And it destroys people's ability to build something interesting. And it doesn't matter how good you are at your job, if that specific set of values isn't imbued in what you're building, you will fail. And it doesn't matter. And right now, that is the one most important thing that if you're going to leave away with this is just don't believe the hype and the bullshit that we're in right now. How do we do this? We didn't even come up with this framework. A guy worked for me. I'm not going to say who it is because I was literally like 9 times I was going to fire this numbskull. And he came to me and said, Chamath, at eBay, we had this framework. eBay, this is 2007. I'm like, eBay? eBay sucks. What can I learn from eBay? And he said, well, we had this framework we used at eBay. And we tweaked it a little bit, and what I realized was, oh my gosh, there's this massive amount of complexity when expressed in simplicity can be extremely useful. And the tweaks that we made, eBay is a different product, and eBay now is a wonderful company doing really, really well. Who laughed? Come on, it's doing really well. Was we sort of created a framework in which we applied those 3 very simple principles of measuring, testing, and trying things. And we said, okay, the biggest risk that we have is we alienate the people that trust us today and use the product. And when you alienate someone, what happens is it's actually not palatable generally in top-level metrics. But there's just this extremely long tail. So, like anecdotally, you can look at companies, and let's not to pick on HP as an example, but you look at HP. You're signaling me 10 minutes. I have 10 minutes left. Jesus Christ. Okay. And you ask yourself, and I know Meg Whippen. She's actually a really great CEO. So what happened? Well, there's no product innovation right now, and they have to figure out where their growth comes from. Well, when you trace that thing back, well, it's a decision that was made maybe 5 or 6 years ago when it was all about cutting costs and optimizing for short-term revenue. And so you realize, okay, well, that's the long tail. That's how long it takes these things to manifest. Similarly, my biggest fear was we spam our users and we trick them, and it will alienate these people. You won't see it today, but you'll see it in 3 years from now or 4 years from now. And it accelerates when you compound that with a competitor who actually builds a better product that doesn't alienate people. So the most important thing that we did against our framework was I teased out virality and said, you cannot do it. Don't talk about it. Don't touch it. I don't want you to give me any product plans that revolve around this idea of virality. I don't want to hear it. What I want to hear about is the 3 most difficult and hard problems that any consumer product has to deal with. How do you get people in the front door? How do you get them to an aha moment as quickly as possible? And then how do you deliver core product value as often as possible? And after all of that is said and done, only then can you propose to me how you are going to get people to get more people. And that single decision about not even allowing the conversation to revolve around this last thing, in my opinion, was the most important thing that we did. And when I look again in the landscape, things that scale understand that principle, whether it's explicitly or intuitively. And things that don't, and also things that have this amazingly steep rise and then fall off a cliff, and there are really visible examples of that today, also ignore that principle. And it's the discipline to not optimize for the thing that gives you the shortest and most immediate ROI. Because that is never the sustainable thing that allows you to build something useful. So when you boil that all up, the most important two high-level takeaways that we had, and after all of this stuff, was we got to eliminate ego. And ego manifests itself every day. So I talked about it earlier. It's the ego of basically living a lifestyle and a vision and like a Twitter stream than it is actually like living the life of an entrepreneur, building good product and trying to deliver core product value. That takes ego, meaning you have to be comfortable not being rewarded in the short term. And then the second is to invalidate all the lore. In any given product, there's always people who strut around the office like, you know, I have this gut feeling. It's all about gut feeling. And most people with gut feeling are fucking morons. They don't know what they're talking about. They just don't. If we lived on gut feeling, you can look at what happens when you live on gut feeling. Look at the financial markets. Look at how government works. Look at how all of these industries that are completely broken. Gut feel is not useful because most people can't predict correctly. We know this. So one of the most important things that we did was just invalidate all of the lore. As much as we didn't do stuff, all we did was disprove all of the random anecdotal nonsense that filtered around the company. Well, I think it's this, that people are using it because of that, and I want to do this. And it's like, where did you pull that out of? And you know where they pulled it out of. And they just, again, wanted to do it to go back and, reinforce a sense of ego. And a lot of people don't have a culture within a company that allows these two things to happen. And if you can't be extremely clinical and extremely unemotionally detached from the thing that you're building, you will make these massive mistakes and things won't grow because you don't understand what's happening. It takes a really special type of person to not believe the bullshit, and an even more special person to not conflate luck and skill. You have to be, if you're in this type of job, in my opinion, relatively cynical, and you can be confident. Fuck, you can be arrogant. It doesn't really matter. But you can't believe your own BS. Because when you do, you start to compound these massively structural mistakes that, again, don't expose core product value and then don't allow real engagement and real product value to emerge. You don't listen to consumers because you think it's all about your gut. You don't bother doing any of the traditional, straightforward, obvious things that would allow you to answer very straightforward, obvious questions. And you lose yourself. Most people, unfortunately, just don't know what they're talking about. I hate this letter. This letter is the dumbest letter in the alphabet. You people are doing more when you focus on this to ruin the internet for the entire human race. Don't talk about this anymore. Just stop. Talk about being in the weeds and not understanding what you're doing. There's no context when you talk about this. None whatsoever. You are spammers. And spamming is pathetic and it ruins the experience. Don't do it. We never talked about this once. It never came up once. I didn't have some little guy, tickling the ivories on his little Excel spreadsheet, telling me what K values were and all. Tell me how I'm acquiring people. tell me how we're doing getting them to their aha moment, and tell me core engagement. Don't give me these low-level abstractions that allow you to validate, get short-term results in ROI that don't mean anything. Don't focus on things that destroy long-term value. Don't give me stuff that allows you to trick yourself into thinking you know what you're talking about. I'd rather you say you don't know, and I'd rather us figure stuff out together. What I don't want to have happen is a culture where you take these short-term things, you start working on it in the absence of context, and you have these meteoric rises, and what you have is massive churn and fall off, and everyone's looking around with their hands in their pockets thinking, well, what just happened? I thought I was doing a really great job. Well, you're not doing a really great job. You optimize a variable. Now, there may be somebody on your team that should be doing that, but it should be doing that in the context of something much more important. So you destroy a lot of value when you abstract away that high-level goal to something so ridiculously stupid. I'm like raining on everybody's parade today. Core product value is really elusive, and most products don't have any. I actually fundamentally believe that. But I also believe that most products can have some value. So when you put those two things together, again, you go back to the discipline of, do you really know what you're building and why? And do you really understand how to marry things that may be non-intuitive for people, but really are the important things that people need? So I remember when we were launching in Asia, we created a team. So the history of Facebook, right, just very quickly. So I started Facebook. My team launched Facebook platform, huge success. Then, we do this big deal with Microsoft. We raise a huge round, and at the tail end of that round, it's like, oh, well, we're going to launch a bunch of ad products to validate this valuation, and we're going to do all this stuff. And my team goes out and we build 3 products. And again, talk about conflating luck and skill. I had all these people, all of our best guys, working on this product with me, which we called Social Ads and Beacon. And then we had another thing doing sponsored stories, and then we had another team focused on an online self-service ad product. Most of the resources in Mindshare, none of the resources in Mindshare. 8 people, our best engineers, product managers, 2 people. Fast forward to today, all of the revenue, billions of dollars, scaling inordinately, lawsuits, FTC suing us, people telling me on the New York Times I lied about how cross-site scripting worked. I'm not going to lie about cross-site scripting to the New York Times. New York Times, okay? Guys? I mean, really? That's what I'm going to lie to you guys about? So stupid. Anyways, it just goes to show you, at that point, we were seeing this what looked like monotonically negative growth, and we were like, oh my God, what's happening? It was like 25, 30 million people. So we came up with this idea, okay, we're going to focus on growth, and we went and created a team. As part of that, we said we're going to internationalize. We're going to launch. We're just going to go everywhere all over the world. And so we dog-fooded our own product, and we used Facebook platform to create this crowdsourcing translation, which was really successful. But long story short, we get to Japan, Korea, and it's a constant refrain. I go around the valley, I talk to some folks who've done this before, the guys at Yahoo, the guys at Google, the guys at eBay, just to get a sense of how did you think about it? And all these people had the same answer. Well, we take these MBAs who really want to live on an expat package, and we send them out there. And you're just like, okay, well, that's not the right answer. So first thing we did was we hired only native people in those native markets. So I had these guys, trying to, I have an MBA from Harvard. I really want to spend time around. I'm like, get the fuck out of my office. Go to BA.com, buy a ticket, get out of my face. You're not going to travel on the company dime. But you'd hire all these people natively. So we had this amazing guy that we hired in Japan who raised his hand and he said, it's really important to actually have specific elements of the profile be different. Because in Japan, the cultural dynamic is different. And so we said, well, what does that mean to you? And he said, well, maybe it means, putting your blood type on the profile. And you're like, that makes no sense. But it makes no sense to us. But it makes sense to him. And so, we developed this flexibility where we're like, okay, well, maybe the connections we're trying to make in that market are a little too elusive. So this product that worked here just didn't have any context here. And so you would say, well, Facebook has clear product value. But in Japan at the time, it didn't. And so having the courage to sort of reset and redefine what it means in any given market Again, takes a lot of courage. And we did it. And now it's massively scaling. And then all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and you're like, oh my gosh. It's like we don't know what we don't know. In every single market, people react differently. They behave differently. They speak different languages. Guess what? Spanish is not Spanish. Maybe you didn't know that. 5 minutes. I got it. I'm on it. So the point is, even when you think something works, it probably doesn't work for everyone. And finding a framework that allows you to actually restructure and reorganize the things that you're doing to expose value in different ways to different people in different situations is an extremely important thing. Again, goes back to how do you live in a world where you're willing to redefine and reset the things that you do independent of what the short-term feedback loop is telling you. It's a very difficult proposition. We knew we were going to beat MySpace when we had like 45 million users. They had like 115 million. We just knew. We used to just like, that was not what we celebrated. We celebrated it at 45 million. It was kind of like a high five. We're like, all right, let's get back to work. And the reason was because we had started to do enough things right where we could just see now. We understood what we were doing. After all the testing, all the iterating, all of this stuff, you know what the single biggest thing we realized? Get any individual to 7 friends in 10 days. That was it. You want a keystone? That was our keystone. There was not much more complexity than that. There's an entire team now, hundreds of people that have helped ramp this product to 1 billion users based on that one simple rule. So if you were looking for a lot of complexity, I couldn't give it to you. But we were able to reframe the entire experience around that one simple premise. A very simple, elegant statement of what it was to both capture core product value, to define what it meant to be able to onboard into a product that allowed you to communicate, to get into a network, to find density, and then to basically iterate around that. And then what we did at that company was we talked about nothing else. Every Q&A, every all hands, nothing was spoken about other than this. Monetization didn't really come up. Platform came up, but again in a secondary or tertiary context. But it was the single sole focus. But because we had defined it in this very elegant way that expressed it as a function of product value, it was something that everyone could intrinsically wrap their arms around. Again, another reason why focusing on, abstracting growth down to these low-level things is not right. So the person that runs growth on any team has to be strategic and capable enough to engage on the core strategy of the product. Because then you allow yourself to up-level the conversation and have it become the most important framework in which you organize an entire company. How equity is given, how expenses are generated, how things are focused on, who gets hired, who gets fired. But when you understand core product value, and then you can basically pivot around it and create these loops that expose that over and over and over again, this becomes the most important and obvious thing to do. And in the few companies that I help now with this context, when they do that, and when it's the CEO or when it's the co-founder who are living in that world and living in this context, they've consistently, systematically, every single one has been successful. Every single one of them. I've also met a lot of people who ask all these questions and, they're like, hey, I'd love to really, and I meet them and they're kind of D-bags. And they're like, way too quantish and way too kind of passive aggressive and a little aggro. And it reminds me of something that's actually, again, a lot more important than the short-term ability for people to focus on short-term results, which is in this battle between culture and capability, culture wins every time. And what you value is really what you achieve. And so when you see these companies again today that had these massive apexes of rocket ship growth, and now, some are public, and now we're going through just unbelievable, retching, gut-wrenching change, negative, spiraling churn downwards. What you realize is that's not a growth problem, although it seems numerically a growth problem. What that is a product value and culture problem. And when you're focused on, again, K, well, not KKK, but you get a point. Another reason why K sucks, right? I mean, use it 3 times, you're a racist. Jesus. But the point is, that's the type of stuff that always comes back and it gets you. So it's a short-term optimization. It never works. You have to work backwards from what is the thing that people are here to do? What is the aha moment that they want? Why can I not give that to them as fast as possible? Measuring that in days is unrealistic. Measuring it in hours is unrealistic. Measuring it in minutes is necessary but not sufficient. But like, how do you get that to seconds? How do you get that to hundreds of milliseconds? That's how you win. And if you can't even understand what the thing does, optimizing all of this stuff over time, I think it just creates these really bad, crappy companies that all they do is just spam and destroy the internet for everybody else. So to this end, this is really what I wanted to leave you with, which is you probably expected a bunch of formulas and stuff. Tough. You have to really understand this. And go back to that first slide. Detached, egoless, focused on what's important, not living the hype, not trying to follow some lifestyle, but doing what you think is important, focusing on core value, ruthlessly prioritizing, and getting people who believe in these things. These are the values that we originally wrote in terms of how we recruit. Again, may seem like a crazy thing, but for all the CEOs here, all of you people should be writing this down. This is how you should recruit. It worked for us. I give this to every single company I invest in. It works for most of them. And these are things that, in my mind, are so obvious, blindingly, glaringly obvious. And people make mistakes around these things all the time. A very high IQ, self-explanatory. A strong sense of purpose are people that will not buckle under short-term pressure. A relentless focus on success, just so competitive that you will do whatever it takes to win. Aggressive and competitive people who always respect the person but constantly challenge the idea. A high-quality bar that borders on perfectionism, just nothing is ever good. You win, something improves by 10 basis points, now it needs to improve by 20 basis points, now it needs to improve by 1%. That kind of living in that world is just a really great dynamic. People who are comfortable taking something that works and saying it doesn't work here and let's just reset and start again. And it just takes a lot of courage. When that guy came to me in Japan and said, hey, I think we need to introduce a blood type, or our team in Korea came with a bunch of different ideas, or our team in India came up with this really clever way of engaging with Facebook over a phone. You have to be willing to take yourself out of your own biases and find people who are willing to come up with things that, again, are unconventional. Another reason why you can't live in the bubble that is the valley. There are too many problems and too many products that are focused on solving the needs of the 1% of the 1% that live here. And the reality is there are 7 billion people in the world. Most have never even used a PC. Most are coming straight into a world of phones. They're living in an entirely different context. They have completely different socioeconomic paradigms. And you have to be able to be sensitive enough to empathize with where they're coming from. High integrity, I think, speaks for itself. It's really easy to kind of, focus on short-term results. And I just don't think there's enough of the long-term thinking. Being able to take some arrows along the way in the short term because you're trying to build something for the long term. And having a culture and set of values where that's rewarded. Perfect example of this is LinkedIn. Reid Hoffman's an extremely good friend of mine. That is an unbelievable company. Built over 10 years, 11 years of just working. Friendster comes out of nowhere. Reid didn't panic. MySpace comes out of nowhere. Reid didn't panic. Facebook came out of nowhere. He didn't panic. Just built a great product and just kept working and working. Did not take the short, easy way out. And you have to respect that because when those guys win, they win. And they win in scale, and they win for a long time. Surround yourself with good people seems obvious, but I see a lot of people who are just like not comfortable recruiting people that are better than them. The best thing that I did was recruit 4 people to my team. My original growth team was James Wang, who was an engineering lead on Facebook platform, Naomi Gleit, who's the most tenured employee at Facebook and one of our best product managers, Alex Schultz, who is this unbelievable sort of crazy growth guy, and Javier Olivan, who ran international for me, and Blake Ross, who is a product manager who also founded Firefox. All of these guys are dramatically better than I was. All I did was enable a framework and create discipline. And they all thrived. And the great thing when I left was they didn't miss a beat. And that's really, really a good sign. And then the last thing is, cares about building real value over perception. I like oolong green tea as much as the next guy. It doesn't make anything happen. I like skinny jeans too. More on girls and guys, but whatever. It doesn't mean anything. And right now we're living in a world where you can get distracted by things that don't matter and the superficiality of how you think things should be done versus the things that need to get done. And that takes a lot of courage. So I think my time is up. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions.
A few minutes for questions, and we're trying our new approach here of tweeting questions. So one of the first ones we have is, what was it about Instagram that made it worth $1 billion to Facebook?
I'll give you my opinion. So again, as a person that's not involved but was there. So again, when you talk about core product value at Facebook, one of the key things that it got right or it understood was the connectivity around you being able to associate your friends in social situations. And the simplest manifestation of that was in photos. And so when we launched our photo feature, it literally was just explosive growth. And so here it is where, in many ways, it is the atomic unit of how Facebook gets organized. As much as people are an atomic unit, it's almost even more important in the sense that it's even more elemental. And so all that is great, and Facebook is generating billions and billions of photos a day, and all of a sudden, along comes this company who does the equivalent thing in a slightly different paradigm, a looser privacy model, but all on mobile, and in a context where people enjoy consuming the content as much as they enjoy consuming the photos on Facebook. And so from my perspective, it's both defensive and offensive. From the defensive perspective, it locks in that core tenet of behavior and product value that is essential and the elemental building block on which everything else around Facebook is built on top of. And offensively, it gets you into a place where now you have this flanker strategy where you have your main sort of product, getting more and more usage and getting more and more entrenched and, creating this fertile ground all over the world on phones. And you have this unbelievable product-specific application that does the same thing. And now you both can go and sort of thrive. But it was a combination, in my opinion, of the offensive capability of what it gave Facebook as a tool in its arsenal and defensively protecting this core element that if all of a sudden that behavior is seeded someplace else and photo activity started to be generated and stayed in another environment, I think it's very problematic for Facebook. Or would have been, but I don't think it is anymore.
All right, anyone else want to tweet a question? Everyone's busy quoting you, Chamath, so lots of good quotes today.
I don't use the Twitter, but I'll make sure I get on it.
We have time for one more. Someone wants to, we're waiting for an update here.
Just how did you decide on what was the main activation metric of the 7 people, 7 friends and 10 days?
Well, it actually...
That doesn't mean every startup should go to
No, that's exactly right.
What's the kind of process for deciding what that core?
So it started with invalidating lore. So we had all of these anecdotes about how people thought the site worked. And part of me is just a cynical part of me, which is just like, I just like proving people wrong, especially when I don't think they know what they're talking about. And so for the first 6 months, it was like, we're just going to instrument something and just prove people wrong, because the best thing is what they do is they shut up. And then they actually, the next time they speak, they try to know what they're talking about, which generally culturally is just a very good thing. So in that process, we're like, oh my gosh, there's these weird things that are happening, and you rinse and repeat through all these cohorts, and you're like, why did these people get into a certain space and are now fully engaged and ramped up and have these vibrant networks, and these people didn't? And we just tried enough things where we were able to back into that axiom being the sort of, the definitive sort of thing that defined how things work for us. But for you, it's going to be different. But it started, if I had to give you a framework, it would probably be, you got to start with a broad cross-section of engaged users, and when you work backwards from each of those, and you are smart enough and clever enough to really figure out the different pathways in which they got to that place, you can probably tease out what those simple things are, and then hopefully, and I think most products are structured this way, you can then sort of path people, more and more of those people, into those same click flows that allow them to get to that state. But again, it starts with like looking at an engaged user, not just thinking about how many emails can I send and how do I, trick everyone to like click on a select all or not unselect a select all. And no offense, like we did that too, but I mean we did that after we figured that shit out.
Okay, we'll take one last question.
So when you guys were expanding internationally, and you said you met you got an associate in Japan that kind of told you these things that you didn't know, how do you know to trust that person?
Well, look, the best thing that happened is like I'm not American, I'm Canadian, but I'm not even really Canadian. Well, I am Canadian, but I was born in Sri Lanka, so I like I love America and everything that's given to me, but I'm pretty cynical about like the imperialistic nonsense of a lot of Americans and how Americans treat their place in the world, to be quite honest with you. And so my mental sort of like worldview, I think, like was one where that combined with the feedback that I got from all these big companies were like, well, I have this really great, MBA, JD guy that, and it's just like, you're just like, well, how is this whitey going to fucking figure out Korea? Like, no offense, but like, a Korean's going to figure out Korea before, you know what I'm saying? Like, this guy's, hey, guys, we're coming here to take over. And it's like, really? That's crazy. That's just absolutely crazy. So I was just like, let's just hire some really smart, awesome young Korean lady. And she's kicking ass. And then it's like, let's do the same thing in Japan. Let's do the same thing in Brazil. Let's do the same thing. It's not complicated. Like, that's not so hard. And then just listen to them and let them try. We had a culture, fortunately, of experimenting and trying a ton of stuff, and we celebrated failure more than we really celebrated success. We would celebrate these massive landmark milestones: 100 million, 250 million, 500 million, and even $1 billion. But $1 billion was like this, like kind of like ho hum thing. The growth team had a dinner here at Madeira. That's we all kind of got together, the original team, and kind of had a quiet celebration. So we're more interested in just trying stuff and learning, right? And then it was just a matter of having different people willing to try different stuff in their own markets, and then us being able to give them a framework where we said, look, 99% of the thing can't change, but you have this 1% flexibility, and if you need more, justify it. And that was a good interplay. But it's kind of like just part of my worldview of just like, America's great, but it's just like there's like a lot of other great people and a lot of great countries too.
I agree with you, but it's still like hard to read. Like, you have to be able to have the resources to test things like that.
Well, I mean, I think but those frameworks. So the great thing is we had to build all of our stuff ourselves, right? You don't have to do that anymore. For you guys, like even something as simple as like, our ability to like A/B test was just a convoluted mess. For you, it's like so straightforward, and you can't even do it yourself. Just go use Optimizely, or like now it's like there's like 19,000 gajillion like Hadoop companies and Hive companies out there. There was none when we were doing this stuff. So we had to just like we were rolling our own stuff constantly. So like we just had like a lot of delays that you don't have to suffer from. So that abstraction allows you to free up resources that you can allocate in different places. But it just again it comes back to the discipline of like, is the senior manager of the company fixated on a goal and then giving flexibility to someone who has the political capital and the patience and the resolve to get there, and then the ability to question and understand really what's happening in a product. And the other thing is, this is like a lot of this credit goes to Zuck because he managed the board and all of the people around so that it's like, we're doing this. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes it's like, and we had a very functional, useful board. And a lot of times boards can maybe distract CEOs as well. It's like, well, focus on this and focus on that. And then they come down and they shout from the mountaintops, hey, we're going to do this. And then when it gets filtered down to an individual person, what they hear is K, 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 K. And I think that's where you kind of like lose your stride.
All right. Thank you guys. Thank you, Chamath. Please give him a round of applause.